ago. He was, but he still remembers. Oh, never mind, we're being recorded. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm sitting here next to Ramsay, who's going to continue with part 2.
Part 2 of 7.
So I'm going to share screen.
In 2 parts.
And then I'm going to let Harold in from the waiting room.
Plug in?
No, not yet. Not quite. Not quite. Pretty soon. Okay. Is everybody seeing Thomas Piketty or Piketty or however?
Yes.
Oh, okay, plug in. Okay, we're plugging here in studio, and let me get this. I don't know why this is just floating here. So this is movable, Ramsay. Oh, I don't know where to move it. There, I got rid of it. Okay, Ramsay, take it away.
That's a good introduction. A cough. I apologize. I've had this darn cough for some time, and I'm improving, but still coughing. So I may interrupt here. Of those of you out there, anyone want to ask questions of anything before we get started? We've only got 255 slides to do in here, 50 minutes. And there's lots of background talk here. We're ready to go. The intent is to try and review pretty quickly what we went through last time. And once again, I'll have a look. Or John will nudge me and say, look, there's a hand up and you need to shut up and let the question being asked. The goal here is to get to so what do we do about all this problem, Mr. Thomas? And we'll give that a shot here. If you remember from last time, I'm going to go ahead. Iko, you've got it. Okay. A fairly quick review, about 50 slides of review, which is really fast paced. So be patient. If it's too fast, just suck it up because John will give you a video anyway. Piketty's goal when he wrote this book was to try and encourage some real discussion in democratic societies about this wealth distribution. We've already got a problem. Thank you, John. Backs. If you remember, or even if you don't, he is famous for this formula, GR is greater than G. That is, if you own capital, you're almost certainly to gain more wealth during the course of some period of time than those that don't have it, because the annual rate of the economic growth, G, will never match the rate of growth of capital. And he wanted to suggest that in slow-growing economies, which has been almost all of human history, R is always going to be greater than G. In very fast-growing economies, which are rare, one big moment, 1945 to 75, and still somewhat today, R, that is G, the economic growth the yearly economic growth can almost catch the return on capital. And you'll see 2 graphs here that sort of demonstrate that point. There you are. A graph from 0 to the perspective 2001, but 70 years from now. But yeah, some of this, of course, is somewhat speculative, but he's got plenty of data. And you can see that indeed, in the period after World War I, and especially after World War II, the amount of economic growth, and this means that people that are working salaries can maybe save some money and catch up on wealth distribution. The amount of growth, G almost caught R. And if you count in taxes, the amount of wealth accumulated by the state because of taxes, watch what happens to this graph. Have a look at that one and have a look at that one. After taxes, in fact, you can have a society in which the amount of growth per capita in a society actually exceeds the return on capital because you're taking away some of that wealth that people that own capital have. And Piketty says that's a pretty good thing that you get different societies that way. He guesses, he has good data to support the notion that the old habit will return somewhere around 2050. And he makes this point that while that's, I'm going to back up, while there's good news there as far as more equal societies, he says, let's not be cavalier about it. The main reason why capital declined so much, the growth of capital declined so much in the period 1913 to up to World War II and a little bit after, was so much capital was simply destroyed. It wasn't primarily because it was redistributed by taxes. It was because so much capital was destroyed by war, depression, another war. So that red line that will indicate a reduction in equality is a great thing. But if the reason it happened was because of human misery, war, depression, war, that's not a very good thing. And he had a list of reasons why so much capital was destroyed. And down there near the bottom, he says, yeah, high progressive taxation was one of those reasons, but not the main reason. The main reason was so much capital was simply destroyed or defaulted on, or there were bankruptcies, et cetera, et cetera. So he says, you know, that's not that you can gain a greater equality in society if you destroy a lot of wealth, but that's not a great thing to do. And if you remember this last time or you were here last time, this was an interesting mental quest of Americans to review a research done by two fellows in 2011, I think, asking Americans if you could have an ideal distribution of wealth by quintiles, the richest fifth, the poorest fifth, etc. What would that look like? And that was the result that they got from their data. And it was amazing to them that there was so little differentiation among women, men, Republicans, Democrats, poor, rich. There was a general sense, it seemed, that that was about the right distribution of wealth or desirable distribution of wealth. Everyone knew that wasn't the case. The second question was, what do you think it is? Americans knew very well it was worse. They had no idea, however, how bad it really is. Where the bottom 40% actually has essentially no wealth and never has had much wealth. And so that's with that as background and a discussion of wealth. Let's move forward here. Here's wealth distribution in the United States updated. It's almost exactly the same as it was back then. If you take the blue and black segments, that's only the top 1%, 33% of American wealth. You get to add in the gray, you get to the top 10% of America as 2/3 of American wealth. You get down to the bottom 50%, they've got almost nothing. And this is not new. It used to be the bottom 90%, but at least the middle had something in the past. Is there a hand going up? No. There's a graph of how it's been changing over time since the 1990s. The top pulling away, the bottom getting less and less and less. There's another graph suggesting almost the same sort of thing. It's been getting extraordinarily bad since the 1990s, and the top continues to pull away. There are consequences to that, of course. This is an interesting graph. I can't remember the date. I can't even remember the source, but it graphs on the x-axis inequality. The further you go to the right, the greater inequality. On the y-axis, the inelasticity, the growing inelasticity in social mobility in a society. So the higher up you go on the y-axis, the less mobile a society is, that is, people being able to move up from poor to something middle class. It's a very, not surprisingly, it's a very direct relationship. The red line. Unfortunately, the United States is way near the top, quite unequal, and not surprisingly, not terribly mobile. Down there on the bottom, you see the countries, hardly surprising, that have the greatest mobility among people that are sort of at the bottom that can sort of work their way up. Finland, Norway, Sweden. It is a relief for us to know that at least Italy and the UK were even worse in their inability, and you know, and so forth. That's bad news. And that is certainly not the American dream that we thought was that we were free to move around and so forth. To reinforce that point, there's a graph of the share of home listings affordable by middle income people now, from 2012 to 2023. It has dropped like a rock, now down to like 16%. A lot of the drop the last 5 years or 4 years or 3 years is because of inflation, and the average person just can't afford the high interest rates for loans. But even middle income people can't afford to buy homes in the United States anymore. And so much for social mobility in good old America. So to drive home a point, remember this famous moment that Hillary is caught saying she was talking about the basket of deplorables who would always vote for Trump. They were racist, sexist, homophobic, and all. Yeah, well, that's probably sort of true. But by the same token, that crowd has got a real reason to feel exploited, because, goddamn it, they have been exploited. A huge number of them at any rate, especially if they're that bottom 40%. How about global wealth? There's a graph to follow that would pop up for students decades ago, and they'd say, "Oh, it looks like a martini glass." So I talked about the martini glass shape. That's the graph of global wealth. The top being, of course, the top 1%. The top fifth is the top 10% of all the people in the world and who's got the wealth. And down the bottom, where a red line that barely exists, is the amount of wealth that people below the top 20, the top 20% or the top 40% have, and it's diddly squat. This is hardly new, but it hasn't changed all that much.
Hey, Ramsay, one question on that.
Yeah.
Difference between wealth and income.
Wealth is what you pass on to your kids. Income is what you learn during the year. Wealth is what you accumulate.
Well, I'm a little confused because it says the richest 20% earn 81% of the world's income.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I take you're exactly right. I'm remiss I had a wealth graphic that I could not find, and so this is the best that I could do for the income. It looks exactly the same.
I was going to say income often. I mean, people are making
income. Well, income's never going to match wealth. If you got wealth, you're going to. But thank you for noting that, and I'm remiss for not even noticing it.
Well, but it might be measuring both.
No, it's income. It's income. But wealth. Well, global wealth is reviewed by pop. Yeah, look at the top. Look, you're right.
It's global wealth, and then for each quintile, they just say, okay, and here's
the percentage of income. I take it back. I take it. Maybe
it's doing both.
Maybe I'm okay. Here, whatever it is. Here's another graphic.
Okay.
Global wealth distribution. 100 people. There's one human being up there that is the top 1% who's got almost half the world's wealth. And if you get down to the two top graphics, you get the 12.2% of the world who's got almost all the world's wealth. And the bottom 55% has got essentially nothing. Here's a visual of that maldistribution of wealth. You can see how obese rich people are. And
so Ramsay, I got my hand up.
Mm-hmm.
This is Harold.
Yeah.
So what are all these wealthy people doing with their wealth?
They make more wealth. They invest it. They invest it all.
And what are those investments doing besides spending off more money?
They're making wealth.
I said that, yeah. Besides spinning off more money for the wealthy, what are those investments doing?
They are creating wealth for people that, and most of that wealth they get back. And that since the 1990s, the vast majority of created wealth is going to that top 1%.
My understanding of the capitalist system is that the wealth generates jobs, generates goods,
and
generates
so
new ideas, inventions. It's just not sitting there in a bank making interest to pay wealthy people.
Well, in many cases, no. In many cases, it is sitting in a bank. It's sitting in our treasuries, funding our debt. But sure enough, that's correct.
Okay.
So good for them. We need them. And Piketty agrees. You need for growth. You need the capitalist system. I think what his beef is not enough of that accumulated wealth is plowed back into infrastructure. And by infrastructure, that includes human infrastructure like education, like healthcare, quality of life issues.
Yeah, that's he spends his whole introduction saying, "Look, I am a capitalist. I'm born in blah blah blah. I saw the collapse of the Soviet Union. I'm all for capitalism, but it's got to be capitalism that is under control by democracy, and democracies which allow capitalism to exist in a functional way have got to share some of that wealth, so that so that the people that are not gaining all that wealth say, okay, I'm willing to live with that. I'm willing to live with some people having a little bit more wealth." But how much? Well, you saw that first graphic. There's a general sense that there's a limit to how much the very wealthy ought to have. And so we're going backwards here. What's happening? Oh, no. Okay. So here's another graphic. Just to make the point of how much worse it's been getting since the 1990s. Oxfam has been calculating. Well, here's the graphic. And they say in the year 2016, the top 1%, the top 1% owned more wealth than the rest of humanity combined. And it's been getting worse ever since. Another thing they have been publishing for some time is how many rich people does it take to have more wealth than the bottom 50%. When we first did this presentation, it was 85 of the richest people in the world owned more than the poorest 50. Well, look at how it's changed in the interim. 62 people, 43 richest, the 26 richest, the 22 richest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The vast majority of the wealth that's being created is owned now by that 1%, 10%, whatever. So great for them for making wealth, but it's not being shared in a particular way. What a surprise that there's anger around the world, which is crazy. It's nuts. It's ill-informed, but it's legitimate. So Piketty would afford to say, here's yet another graphic. Approximately 2,000 billionaires in the world own more wealth than the bottom 4.6%, bottom 4.6 billion. So why wouldn't you leave Guatemala? You got no choice there anyway. And so forth and so forth. This makes sense. I mean, the shareholders said, no, this is bullshit. Thank you for the Delaware judge for avoiding that his pay package. And then Musk threw a tantrum and threatened to build everything else outside of Tesla. And the shareholders caved and said, okay, you can have your goddamn 48 billion. And of course, with that comes political power and everything else. In the United States, as far as wealth distribution in of the world in the United States, the various organizations do this calculation every year. The Swiss bank, which was it? Doesn't matter.
I think they went bankrupt.
Well, the other one, someone else picked it up.
Swiss.
But the Swiss, then they were bought by UBS, who now does this.
Okay.
Of the world's wealth, 32% of the world's wealth is owned by Americans, not you and me probably, but although we probably have a tiny share. The fraction of America as far as its population of the world wealth is for a little bit more than 4%, but we have on paper at least 32% of the global wealth, yada yada yada. So Piketty is going to say, this is not, when things get that bad and people are aware of it, they may not have been aware of it 2,000 years ago. They sure as hell are aware of it now. It doesn't end well. And he asked these kinds of questions over and over again. Can we find a way to continue with capitalism, get it back under control so it's benefiting everybody in a reasonable way? Or do we simply wait for the next disaster like World War I, the Depression, World War II? And here's one of the points that he would like to make, Harold, to say in a state where you don't share the wealth very well, the so-called regalian states, that the regalia that the monarchs have and wear around the crowns on their head and so forth, those states tend to have about Bob Oxenberg. Those regalian states would typically have 5 to 10% of the GDP income, and they didn't do much. They didn't have much money to do much with. The prime reason for existence was to protect the wealth of those that already had it, including protecting local borders from another set of wealthy people that were trying to steal it. But once you get to sorry, we got some noise here. When you get to after World War I, World War II, the states gained 30 like us to 55% like Sweden or so forth of GDP. We've got sound. Someone's gonna.
I think it's Bill Walker.
Okay, we got somebody. Bill, maybe got to mute yourself. And when states have that kind of wealth,
we didn't get any further than making the $800 deposit. Yeah, that was it.
so hold on, we got some interfering sound here.
Oh, I think they hung up.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll carry on. When you have that kind of wealth, the state has that kind of wealth, it can provide for everybody stuff like healthcare, quality education, housing, retirement. You've reached a social state. Hold on, we're going to try and find out who needs to be muted.
I'd have to get out.
Never mind. We're moving on. I hope we're on. So Piketty's challenge is, look, we can be happy that these social states got built after World War II, somewhat before World War I, and then they collapsed, and real bit of that. It's good, but it's going to be a whole hell of a lot tougher in the rest of the 21st century, which is his book, Capitalism in the 21st Century. Here's why. He's got 4 reasons. We'll review these one by one. One, he says that that kind of economic growth that allowed for that kind of taxation and growth of wealth for kind of, to some degree, everybody between 1950 and 1990. He says that's gone, and that's not coming back. The 4% year by year by year on average for 40 years is an extraordinary amount of economic growth. Probably certainly unheard of in human history, maybe unheard of ever again. He said, here's why. Well, let's see. Here's why that growth is almost certainly not to come back. He says, I foresee many economists would be more grim than me. Maybe 1.5% economic growth, nothing close to 4% economic growth in the last half of the century, because number one, the human population will have almost gone to zero, and will go to zero by 2001. I mean, 2021 to 2100. But with very little not much growth in human beings, there's just not many more consumers. So you're not going to get much more economic growth from the human side. And on the technological side, he says, once societies get to this really technical sophistication, you can gain more economic growth by the margins, but nothing above 1.3. Many of us would say less than that. At 1.5% economic growth, you are going to get, you're going to get what has been typical in most human history. Those that have wealth are going to be able to make more because they are renters now. They're really not, in many cases, they're not really providing any services or any innovations whatsoever. They're just collecting rent for the stuff that they own. Meanwhile, the people that are earning an income are going to see some growth in income, but not much. And probably in most cases, barely keeping up with inflation. You don't save diddly squat. And he says directly, the entrepreneurs tend to turn into rentiers within a generation. It used to be over 2 or 3 generations. The second, the grandkids were just they were wealthy because they inherited it, like Trump. But now it's happening in a lifetime. So number one, growth is not going to be as fast. Number two, with slowing growth, the odds of going back to those high incomes of the high income tax, high capital tax, whatever, high inheritance tax in 1945, 1970, probably not on. People are probably not going to tolerate. You're going to need other sources of taxation other than those. 3, if you're going to really come up with new taxation, it's got to be a global tax because the rich know where to hide their money. And here's a quote from I don't know where I found this, but this guy running a wealth fund for very rich people says, we're seeing record numbers of wealthy Americans applying for other citizenships because they know they're kind of worried that things are falling apart here and they need to hide their wealth. I mean, about a decade ago, the economists estimated 21% of the world's wealth was hidden away in hidden tax. Piketty had only guessed 10%. You see that building down on the lower right? That building is in the Cayman Islands. It is home to nearly 20,000 companies that say that's where their headquarters are, which is, of course, total bullshit. And everyone on the planet that pays attention knows this. So Piketty is going to say it's going to have to be a global tax. Yes, this is going to be daunting, but you better get used to it. And then maybe most important of all, the environment, which has been really rather stunningly benevolent for some short period of time, ain't benevolent anymore. And there's going to have to be a lot of wealth spent simply to repair, not to necessarily create any more wealth, just to get back to something a little bit normal. Wildfires. You got all these people roaming around the planet, and it isn't just because of political conflict. A whole hell of a lot of it is because their environment's falling apart, and they can't stay alive where they are anyway. So it would be worth to sort of broach this topic. So what happens in the 1970s? All these graphics sort of go down to 1970. The decline in economic inequality go down to about 1970 and then come back up again. What happens? Well, a whole hell of a lot. Here's some stuff in the U.S. that starts happening in the 1970s. Barry Goldwater may have lost, but his Southern strategy won. And the Republicans are still using it. Kevin Phillips, the Atwaters, Strom Thurmond, Richard Nixon himself. Nixon's going to win 2 presidential elections on that Southern strategy, and the Republican Party is still playing it big time. Nixon will take us off the gold standard in 71. The oil embargo, because of the Yom Kippur War, causes massive oil prices to go up. Stagflation creates a dilemma of economics that no developed country can solve very well because they require 2 things at once. You're not supposed to, according to classical economics, have inflation at the same time that you have high unemployment, but we did. Then Watergate crisis, of course, gave even less, made people even more skeptical of the U.S. government being a fair government. Stagflation leads to tax revolts all over the country, like Prop 13, which are still causing havoc in California, and blah blah. And then there's a second oil increase in massive oil crisis because of the Iranian Revolution, and they're down the bottom. That the New Deal, Great Society, Supreme Court that sort of ruled in favor for a relatively short period of time in American history in the favor of the common citizen, it's long gone. You got a whole new kind of Supreme Court. Back to, frankly, what has been typical of most Supreme Courts in our history, ruling inside of the wealthy. It may look like it's primarily inside of Christian fundamentalism. That's sort of a sideshow, one would say. Naomi Klein, some remember her. She hadn't written much. She wrote this fantastic book saying, this is just exactly what the crowd was waiting for. People waiting. Someday there's going to be a crisis, and if we have an answer to the crisis that is contradictory to all that Keynesian economics, we will take over. And sure enough, Milton Friedman actually said as much. We hang around long enough, and our belief system will eventually have a second chance because there will be this crisis. It's back today. I mean, if I just take a couple articles from the New York Times very recently, like June, a couple of weeks ago, and they're apparently, according to some analysis, all I know is what I read, and I hope it's sort of accurate, is there is sort of apparently some sort of a new centralism building among those that are actually going to talk about economics, not abortion and gay rights and the rest of it. And this author said, let's call it neopopulism. What it says is that sure enough, this unquestioned belief in free markets, which has ruled the roost now for 50 years, has indeed, we're all willing to admit it, bundled money to the 1%, and that 1%'s got enormous power, yada, yada, yada. And that is a problem. There's another article that says, yeah, we used what do we used to call it? Neoliberalism, the Washington Consensus. It's sort of fairly common sense now within the many in Washington, D.C., New York, and so forth, that in fact it didn't work. The idea was, thank you, Milton Friedman, Frederick Hayek, Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher, and so forth. If you lower trade barriers and end the era of big government, the United States will lead the world in creating prosperity for its own people, and democracy will spread around the world, and so forth. And in fact, it's true, U.S. incomes have grown, but the wealthy have gotten most of it. Life expectancy in the United States is now lower than any other country in the developed world. And yet, China's coming along well too, but it hadn't become more free; it's become less free, and so that's not working. And we'll kind of return back to that. So back to the 70s. Why did what worked for a little while, 1945 to 1975, why did the Bretton Woods currency arrangement break down? Remember what that was. The agreement was the US dollar will be defined in terms of the value of gold. $35 equals an ounce of gold. And then every other major currency will be defined in terms of a ratio to the dollar. And those values of the pound and the German mark and the French franc compared to the dollar, they will be readjusted every now and then by governments, not by currency speculators. And so why did Nixon get rid of it? Well, he had no choice. It was called the Nixon shock at the time. Why did it happen? For a whole series of reasons. Among them all, Nixon just needed money, and he was not about to raise taxes with his reelection coming up. Why was the money needed? Well, to the credit of the Johnson administration, they had come up with Medicare and Medicaid to the benefit of everyone sitting in this room, and most of you go out there in the audience there. But that costs money, taxes. Social Security, which had been around for a while, cost taxes. There had been some other social programs, all of which cost taxes. And on top of that, the Vietnam War, which is still going on, was expensive. And Nixon said, I can't raise taxes to pay for all this. I'll never get reelected. I'm just going to print money. And if you print money, of course, the French and others said, wait a minute, we don't think your dollar's worth the $35 for an ounce of gold anymore. And back in 1971, private citizens in the U.S. could not own gold except for coins and jewelry. But foreign governments could ask for gold, and they did. In particular, de Gaulle did. De Gaulle hated us, but for Vietnam and a variety of other reasons anyway. And that was it. Nixon said, we can't give you gold, and we're done with that. And there really hasn't been no true international currency except by default ever since, which has created a big mess. 50 years later, you got graphics like this. I think any of us wanted to try could come up with a list of 50, 100 things that are really a crisis in the next time period. All sorts of young people being born, and there's just not that many jobs out there because the production is mostly somewhere else in the world anyway. Our industrial machine has become increasingly efficient, ever more efficient. You don't really need people to do that much anyway. Here's a graphic from the New York Times some time back. I looked for a new one. It's a graph of the percentage of total students in the United States that qualify for a free lunch as a reduced price. Back in 1994, 95, it was 33%. By 2012, 13, it was up to 51%. I couldn't find updated graphics, but it's likely to be higher, although some of those Biden programs did reduce this somewhat. I mean, these are some of the unencourageables that the Hillary Clinton talked about. Well, yeah, their lives are going to hell, and their kids are miserable and blah, blah, blah.
The deplorables.
Deplorables, yeah. Deplorables, thank you. Here's a wonderful quote. Guy that was former Prime Minister of Luxembourg and now former president of the EU Commission said, we all know what we need to do. We just don't know how the hell to get reelected once we've done it. And then another quote, when the going gets tough, you just got to lie. And it used to be you could lie when the deals were done in secret rooms, smoke-filled rooms, and there was no open hearings and so forth. But we've made a hell of a mess of democracy with TV and weighing too much and God damn it, whatever. I'm going to read this thing totally to see if it gains. Some of you have read this maybe. Here's a guy, interesting person. I can tell a story in which those of us in the educated class, progressive or not, come to address the social, political, economic divides we have unwittingly created. In this reality, we would face up to the fact that all societies have been led by this or that elite group, and in the information age, those who have a lot of education have immense power to political access to political, culture, economic power. We would be honest about our role in widening inequalities. We would abhor the cultural insularity and go out of our way to engage with people across ideology and class. We would live up to our responsibilities as elites and care for the whole country, not just ourselves. Most important, we would dismantle the arrangements that enable people in our class to pass down our educational privileges to our children generation after generation while locking out almost everyone else. Which radical leftist wrote this? David Brooks. Coming to terms with his own guilt about supporting so much over times. I'm going to do that. I probably shouldn't do this. I will. This may be too cute, too precious. Some of you may have been asked to read The Magic Mountain way back in our era. I certainly was. I was glad that my professor insisted that we do it. Perhaps one of the most famous books of that period. Thomas Mann began it before World War I. He finished it only when only after World War I was over. His semi-hero is a Hans Kastrup who visits a relative in a sanatorium up in the mountains of Switzerland. The people have gone there because they have lung diseases and so forth. He himself gets sick and he stands there 7 years. It's a fascinating portrayal of the rich of Europe before World War I. Every country has got a character in the sanatorium. He gets to know them all, and he himself becomes sick as well. And the main point that man wants to make after World War I is over is, look, it seems that we did not have the intelligence, the decency, whatever, to make things right before the war happened. It only happened because of sickness, death, and awfulness that we finally shape up and get our act together and figure out what we needed to do. Of course, that didn't happen after World War I. It took World War II again. And so are we there again? I don't know. This is dicey these days. The Economist had this now out of date covers saying the center cannot hold. I mean, and the economists saying the perceptions of inequality are driving politics way hard to the right in all of the democratic world. And that was an informed title because the center cannot hold is from this very famous poem written at the same time as World War I by William Butler Yeats. Some of you have read it. If you haven't, read it sometime. It is frightening. And you say, are we there again? The center cannot hold. The best like all conviction, while the worst are full of passion and intensity, and so forth and so forth. And yet, here we are, just 2 days ago. Is this going to work? I mean, it certainly worked. It certainly held off the far right for a moment. Can the United States pull this off? I mean, what did it take? I mean, what did it take for this to happen? Well, all the leftists who hate each other and all bitch of men boning and complaining about each other, and each of them has their own fragmented little leftist party, which gets about 1% of the vote. They came together and said, we can't let this happen. We're going to run one candidate among us, and we'll fight it out. The left came out on top, and Macron's center didn't hold, but it got more than Le Pen. And so for the moment, France has got a bit of a chance to see if it can figure out what to do for the unwashed, unhappy masses down there that are so pissed off about inequality and so forth. Back to Davos, because this is where Thomas Mann set his novel. The sanatorium was in Davos, Switzerland. It's unbloody goddamn believable to me.
Really?
And they come back there again, and the rich talk, and in many cases, it's quite laudable. And it is different than the sanatorium because they don't talk about dinner and affairs. They talk about real risks. Look at the risks that they come up with from 10 years out: extreme weather events, critical change to the Earth systems, bio loss and eco collapse, natural resources shortage, misinformation, disinformation, adverse outcomes of AI technologies, involuntary migration, et cetera, et cetera. It's a great list. And then they bring these guys in. There's nothing wrong with bringing these guys in, but they become the most notable people there. And they're brilliant in many ways, but they don't have a clue. I mean, Sam Altman, I assume ChatGPT will double global GDP, just like all technological innovations have. He's talking out of his rear end. He hasn't a clue. And these guys are incredibly self-interested in their technology because they're now billionaires. That's a problem because they're not democratically elected. So where is the current thinking going these days with what we do about our problems? Back to this crap. This is McKinley and the tariffs, which help. Oh God. And here's Susan Collins saying, yeah, that's why we're being driven together. Even Republican Democrats can all agree that China is the problem. We got to deal with China. I say, are you effing kidding me? We're going to have a trade war with China to solve our economic problems. That's gonna bring us together to create better prosperity for the world, to solve the environmental crisis. Blah blah blah. Just to be reminded. Boy, I'm getting a little shrill here. There's a graph of Germany's industrial production in a too long period of time. Focus only on 1923 to 1929. Things had gotten grim in 1923. There was a real chance in 1923 that World War II was going to start right then again, with rocks and stones because Germany had no armaments. But things got better because of some cooperation to help Germany out. And by 1929, Germany was in good shape, probably leading the world in many, many ways and back on its feet. And then what happens? The Depression, US tariffs. And by 1933, you get that. Not that dissimilar in Japan, to be frank. Certainly different mentality, different this and that and so forth. Japan, the Japanese elite and middle class have become rather suspicious of the United States leading up to World War I. Japanese, U.S. colonies near Japan, crappy treatment of Asians in the United States, and things like you'd have to look up if you want. Treaty of Portsmouth made Japan the second-class citizen, naval conference, and so forth. And then the 1930s depression pretty much wiped out their economy. And then that happened, and so forth. Piketty's warning is, look, that sense of unfairness doesn't just seethe and people just lie over and die and say, well, that's just the way it is. It's disorganized, it's crazy, it's nuts, and then it does get organized. And we've seen
Ramsay's Herald again.
Yeah.
Part of the reason that we raised the tariffs on Japan was because they were busy invading Manchuria and China.
Absolutely, no question about it.
It wasn't an economic thing. We're trying to be political.
Well, at the same time, and so we're doing the same thing to Russia. And how's it going?
They just go around it.
Exactly. They say, fine. Well, China's on our side. Who's in Moscow today? Someone know this?
Modi.
Modi's hugging Putin, saying, we love the cheap oil you're sending us. I mean, that's most of the world right there. China, India, Russia. I mean, so much for us bringing Russia to its knees. It just doesn't work that way in a logical, in a world in which there are other people with real power. Yeah.
I'm waiting for the street demonstrations for bombing the children's hospital yesterday.
Well, it's a crazy world. And what Piketty wants to argue is, let me offer an explanation that is not the only one on the planet for sure, but one that is real and maybe the most important and has to be solved. This incredible and increasing inequality in wealth, and something's got to be done about it. Don't tell me there's not plenty. What a disaster. What a disaster in Gaza. What a disaster here and there, so forth. What are the solutions that the U.S. is going to win? Of course not. I mean, my Lord. Here's some small reasons for optimism among democracies at any rate. You asked EU members, do you think it would be mandatory for all members to spend some money to restore the nature that we lost? A huge majority says yes. Only 6% disagree. And how about this country? We say we can't come to consensus. Yeah, maybe we can come to consensus. 61% of people feel a lot, and 84% feel either a lot or some anger at corporations and the wealthy not paying their fair taxes. This is now common sense. This is no longer something that the old, the wealthy create jobs and we should just let them do that. That doesn't wash much anymore. On guns being a problem, there's a pretty good consensus on that. On should government provide health care for all in some manner, 63% yes. 54% of Democrats say we want single payer. Now, how you do that, that's another story. But there is pretty good consensus. If 63% is not enough consensus, what the hell is consensus? What do you got to get to? 90%? So here's an interesting one. 65% of Americans favor electing the president by a national vote. I mean, that's enough to get that done. Good luck getting it done, given our Constitution. So one can argue that among democracies, in ways that are confusing and not ever talked about on MSNBC or Fox, there is some consensus out there. There are some reforms for sure that you'll never get consensus on. See the graphic on the right? This article was written when that green line is, that faint green line over there, when the debt was right there in 2009. And the guy saying, this debt we got to get control over this debt. Well, look what's happened ever since. It said, here's three things that I think almost any logical person would agree. We have to contain medical costs. They're driving this country crazy. And the only way to contain medical costs is to have healthcare reform. We've got to change Social Security. There's got to be you got to take longer to retire, yada, yada, yada. And somehow we got to get Americans to consume less crap. And if that, this guy argues, you're going to have taxes on consumption somewhere. He said, yeah, that's not going to happen through consensus. And so we're back to this thing. We all know we have no trouble. We don't know how to get elected. Well, isn't that a problem? If the authoritarian countries can do some of this right stuff and they stay in power, and democratic governments do the right thing but can't get reelected, So how about let's just review just a bit about our Constitution to maybe stimulate some discussion down the road. Remember, it was negotiated in secret. The people that were sent to Philadelphia to negotiate were told to go and fiddle with the Articles of Confederation. They said, let's be honest, the Articles of Confederation are a disaster. We're writing a new Constitution, but don't anyone let anyone know where we will all be strung up. Signed by only 70% of the delegates in September, ratified a few months later, only by 19 to 13 states. It is true that Virginia and New York did come along pretty quickly afterwards, but the vote in New York was 30 to 27. This is not a constitution that everyone loved. It barely snuck through, and we've had it for a long, long time. And every one of those delegates said, this is not a very good document. It's maybe good for 20 years. We're sure it will be revised. Well, it has been revised with a few. Here's how we revise it. Is this consistent with just to be reminded? What's it take to get an amendment? Either 2/3 of both houses call for the amendment, and it goes out to the states, or 2/3 of the states can call it, and then it goes out to the states. If And then you write the amendment, and then 3/4 of the states have to agree, and it's ratified. Well, you couldn't get Mother's Day ratified. And just if you've never learned this, also in Article 5 is, by the way, this is out of date now, no amendment for the next 20 years can do anything about the first and fourth clauses of the ninth section. The first clause was importation of slaves. You can't touch that for 20 years. The fourth clause was no income tax. You can't touch that for 20 years, which meant that these guys that wrote the Constitution would be dead by then. How convenient. And the last one, no state can be deprived of its equal suffrage, its 2 senators, unless they agree to it. Well, good luck. We're stuck. And you may be back to Hans Crostrup saying we may have to nearly die before we finally figure out that our Constitution has got to be rewritten or redone. Piketty says, here would be one of my best solutions. There has to be we have to start taxing global wealth. Now, I'm going to say, Piketty, that it probably has to be global wealth, and I understand the problems. But let me make an argument for it. You tax the wealth, you don't interfere with the market. The market is a good thing. Let the market do what it does. It does it very efficiently, very well. No tariff, for God's sake, that's interfering with the market. The market sets prices, does other things pretty well. You're not taxing labor. You would democratize many of the things. You would democratize globalization worldwide. You would have a social contract in which you could use that wealth all over the bloody planet. How about we pay you Guatemalans, we pay you El Salvadorans, we give you money to repair your environment and give you and pay your police well so they're not corrupt, and stay in Guatemala and not come here and blah, blah, blah. And then he said, boy, does this sound out of date 10 years later. He said, this is such a natural role for the United States to lead us toward a global wealth, because the United States is a historically optimistic and generous society. Oh, God. He said, let me just give you an example of what you could do with a EU wealth tax. I mean, here's the EU wealth tax I would propose. And if we put that in place for just 2 years, you could pay down almost all the government debt of most European countries so that they would pay so much less money on servicing their debt, which is extraordinary, and start using some of that money to pay for healthcare and yada, yada. John Lee came up with his own version of a U.S. wealth tax. And we don't have time to go through all that. And you're going to get a video. And John can give you this PowerPoint if you want to look at it. But it's this could do, and this could be done, and for sure the general population out there is ready for this, given the anger at the inequality of wealth. Of course, it's not going to happen within a given system of government for reasons that we all understand. And John found this; it's back on the table now, a wealth tax in France after Sunday's election, which Macron had withdrawn, but it's almost certainly he's going to have to give the left a wealth tax. So it's one of those things that needs to be talked about, because there have to be solutions in the next century. You and I will be dead, but our kids could maybe have that discussion. Wealth tax would be one of them. Here's another aspect of wealth tax. This guy, I barely know who he is. I don't know who he is, but apparently he just made $100 billion. And he's got 100 billion, and he's got all this in the stock portfolio, and he'll never have to pay tax because he's never going to sell any of the stock. Unless you sell your stock, you don't have to pay tax. He'll pass it on to his kids, and they get to start at zero. And I don't want to do that. The Biden administration promised, and poor old Biden, he looked a little better back then a while ago. He said, if I'm reelected, I'm putting a surcharge on the unrealized capital gains on some of these. So these capital, the stocks and bonds that never get sold and get to passed on for kids, and they get to start at zero without paying any tax for a while. And his proposed tax, there was the Supreme Court said, by and large, that sounds constitutional to at least 7-2 of us. Now, not on all capital gains, that's a different issue. long lost in Biden's administration, was something he got passed early on, saying, look, we know goddamn well, everyone knows damn well that the rich are hiding their money all over the place. Here's a U.S. law that now any foreign bank that is doing business in the United States has got to inform us of Americans that have foreign investment accounts overseas. And if you don't, we're going to impose a big tax upon you. And it worked. The Swiss reporting this, other people are reporting. I mean, you can find where the wealth is that's being hidden all over the planet. You just have to try. Why haven't we seen actions like this recently? Well, good Lord. I'll try one more and we'll be done here. How about other possibilities of creating some useful global cooperation just to get the ball rolling and see if we can't get things moving? Alexander Hamilton had a rather brilliant idea back there in the 70s. Look, the states don't like each other. The states don't want anything to do with each other. That's why I have the Articles of Confederation. If we create a national bank and it is funded by the states themselves, that gives states a reason to sort of cooperate with one another. Can we have a national bank? And his opponent said, hell no, I'm not going to give you a national bank. I don't want any goddamn national bank. If some of you have seen Hamilton, you've heard the song. And sure enough, the immigrant pulled it off. He came out of that room where it happened, and he had his national bank, and the Virginians got what they wanted. And what did the Virginians get? Everybody out there in audience land, they got the capital of the United States in, well, don't tell me that's Virginia. That's goddamn Maryland. It's not Virginia. Maryland had to give up its territory, but whatever. And that is bullshit. The capital of the United States should have been Philadelphia, but it's in goddamn Washington, D.C. because Alexander Hamilton. Good idea. Let's try this again. Let's see, could we do this? Could we do this internationally? Well, Keynes said back in 1944, yeah, let's do this internationally. It'll never work having a single country try and be the international, creating an international currency. They'll never be able to pull it off for a variety of reasons. So let's instead have a international currency, not currency that anyone ever has in their pockets. It's simply clearinghouse currency for countries that have dollars. If someone gave them rubles for what they bought in the United States for dollars, you've got to clear. This international bank is going to say, okay, we'll give you this Bancor, this artificial currency in exchange for dollars and rubles and so forth, and you can spend it to clear your currency. And Keynes almost got there. And for weird reasons, well, no weird reasons, he had to go to another meeting, and when he went to another meeting, Dexter White from the U.S. Treasury ran the meeting that was going to vote on this, and he convinced that meeting to say, no, let the dollar be there, let the dollar be the international currency. He was Keynes was pissed, and it's coming back. He said, look, it will never work. You're asking a country to do two things at the same time, and they're contradictory. Sooner or later, that country is going to have to print money in times of depression or recession and so forth. And it should never be printing money, creating inflation if it's in charge of the international currency, because everyone's using the international currency. And sure enough, that happened in 1971, just as Keynes predicted. The other thing that the other criticism, which was a French criticism too, was that it's not fair. Whoever has that, it was British citizens before, now it's U.S. citizens. They get this incredible support of their standard of living for just printing money every year, trillions of dollars of stuff that the U.S. wants to buy, resources and products and so forth, oil. TVs, yada, 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 we get by printing money. And sure, that's not quite fair, but it's close to fair. And then the economist says it's true. It's absolutely true. And worse off, when we have an economic crisis, the whole world gets an economic crisis, even though it's not their fault. For example, 2008, why was there a global economic crisis? Because we deregulated through Reagan, and then other people had followed the financial industry. everyone with any kind of sense knew that it was a dangerous thing to do, but they got it done. Illicit money was made. You know how this went. I mean, banks started lending for crap mortgages, and sooner or later it fell apart. Those guys should be in jail, of course, and Obama wanted to put them in jail, and his Secretary of Treasury said, "I want to put them in jail too, but if you do that, you're going to create another financial crisis, and you'll never get reelected." And Obama said, "Okay, screw it, we won't put them in jail." I mean, and there we go. There we go. So when that financial crisis came, the governor of the Bank of China said, just as Keynes said, it's going to happen. Let's go back to what he did, and let's start creating an international currency that everyone has to be part of. The U.S. is going to bitch and moan, but they're only 4.5% of the world's population. We can give the U.S. something. And meanwhile, you have economists. Here's one. John, you can find this and read it on yourself. It's quite a well-written article back in 2008. Said, look, it's not in the United States' interest to be running the international currency anymore. We have it has made us we're living way beyond our means because we get away with it, and we as soon as we've got to do something to get away with living on everybody else's dollar who lends us money to buy crap that we can't afford, and then lends us money to run government deficits that we really can't afford anymore. Who's going to pay that guy? He said we should be leading the charge here. We're the ones who should be leading. It's in our interest to get out of doing the international currency thing. And so there's initiatives all over the place. You can find, here's one that says, let's give this a shot. Eventually you get so-called a world central bank. And I know people sitting out there at 80 years old or 89 or 96 and saying, this will never happen. Well, that's because we're old. We don't think, but this stuff is, according to Piketty, if this doesn't happen, you wait. And if you're in Sudan, it's already happened. If you're in Gaza, it's already happened. If you're in Guatemala, it's already happened. Your life has gone to hell in a handbasket. And all you can do is try and move your family and give your kids a chance. Your life is done. So if anyone were interested, we can maybe take a shot at talking about what this would mean. And Keynes went further. He said, furthermore, that bank should have the capacity to say any country that runs a trade of greater than 5%, or a trade surplus of 5% should be fined, because they are playing fast and loose with the global economy. And Chris, if we're negotiating, we'd have to give the Asians something, because we would be begging them, can you help us for the next 30 years? We know if this international currency comes, it is going to cause American consumers enormous problem, because the stuff that we've bought for relatively cheaply for so long, the prices are going to go up. Can we come up with a mechanism that you will help us with Asians to help us get through this thing, so we don't have a civil war in our own country? We'd have to give them something, like maybe give them the location of the World Bank in Singapore. Just
Move the United.
All right, God, anyone that hung in there that must be nauseated with all this crap. But the passion that some of us have, that we're about to die and we got grandkids and so forth, to say, come on, man, this is not working right. And back in World War I, a bunch of rich, stupid kings and queens sat around and talked about tea and so forth, and a mess was created. And then a pretty good generation solved things for a little while, but it's gone to hell in a handbasket since the 1970s for 1,000 reasons. And there has to be new controls over capital, at least in Piketty's point of view. God, done.
Yeah, the studio audience is going wild. I tell
you. No one's left. No one's left.
Why don't we give Asia Texas?
Yeah. No. You think they're going to take it? Yeah. Mexico doesn't want it back. Yeah.
All right, Texas and Florida. We can throw in Florida for fun.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, there's that argument. You guys want a civil war again? You're free. Go ahead, please,
Yeah.
please.
Right. Let them go.
Let them go.
I've got to introduce a latecomer, Janet Thomas, Ramsay's wife.
Long suffering. She hears this all the time.
Long suffering, yes.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, Janet.
Yeah, well, what do we say here other than don't anyone spill the beans out have the French-Spain
Oh, my
game?
sister has her hand up.
No, okay, we got a question from somewhere.
Shigeko.
Yes, I have a question. If we're, almost in a revolution of inequality against inequality, how come people are supporting Trump, who is probably going to give tax relief to the wealthy?
Because the wealthy, Fox News is one of them. You think the owners of Fox News believe that crap? They don't believe that crap. They're just making money. And the most clever way to keep making money is to use all the hot button issues, abortion, gay rights, wokeness, whatever the hell this all is, America First stuff. You are talking about a set of people, crude though it is to say, by and large, are a little less educated, a lot less educated, a little more confused, a little bit tend to go to church too often, whatever the hell. But that doesn't make them bad people. I mean, they're real people too.
But the populists have some sensitivity to this. Paul Ryan wanted to, stop Medi-Cal and cut Social Security. And Trump, his instincts were no, but there's not going to be any cutting of my people while I'm in power, because disproportionately he has a lot of blue collar.
Yeah, would they really do it? I mean, they were going to get rid of Obamacare. Good luck. Anyone talking about that anymore? Good luck. I mean, they take Switzerland as a small example. The Swiss, independent William Tell, all that crap. They at least have an initiative system. It was, I don't know how many years ago now, at least 30, maybe 40. One of their initiatives, are we going to adopt this proposed new universal medical care system? We Swiss, we're independent, we're wealthy. It passed 50.2 to 40, it barely passed. If you ask Swiss these days if they would give up that system, they laugh and say, "Are you kidding me? We love this system."
Yeah.
And the same thing happened in Canada. It barely got through the Canadian Parliament by the slimmest majority, the universal care. There's going to be some guts out there among politicians to say, just do it and see what happens.
Yeah, and the word that they use that's unfamiliar to us is solidarity, right? With the social solidarity and society. And to go back to France, Le Pen, she's not for taking benefits away from poor people. Quite the opposite. So there is the populists on the right and populists on the left. If you visualize this as a circle and not a straight line, they meet it somewhere on the extreme.
Can I ask, Ramsay, you're talking about global wealth. And so what percentage of that wealth is stocks, real estate?
I have no idea.
Because now,
Yeah. Well, that's why it disappears so fast.
because real estate is
Well, real estate may be real, but that doesn't mean it's worth it. That doesn't mean that the house that Jen and I own is worth $4 million.
Yeah,
I mean,
that value now, it may drop.
It may drop. It will drop.
Still a huge percentage of that wealth.
What, the real estate?
Yeah, real estate.
It's a good. We once did this when we did the Piketty book. We actually did this.
We've got a table.
We got a table on this somewhere. It's substantial, but so what do you do with that? I mean, just because you got it, that doesn't mean it's really worth it. It's got to be sold. Someone's got to have the money to buy it.
Yeah.
If it's only risk, it's that sort of market dilemma. It's like, sure, Mr. Sam Altman, that you're going to double the GDP because everyone's going to buy AI. who the hell's going to buy AI? You're going to have any jobs, and yeah, it may solve a few things, but and they're more likely to create bigger problems because the crooks will use it. Whatever.
So on a global tax, one thing that's happened globally is the corporate tax, right? Everybody came together and said, hey, a minimum 30% or whatever it is, 15%, yeah, 15%, so that you stop having countries race to the bottom by lowering and trying to attract, like in the Cayman Islands.
Or like Ireland, for that matter, as Bob Oxenberg
and,
pointed out.
And Apple, yeah, in Ireland.
I mean, that's not a global government. That's not global cooperation. That's just beggar your neighbor kind of nonsense, which is exactly what was the problem that and created World War I and then created World War II again. We'll take care of ourselves first, and everyone else takes care of themselves first. And you got to, in a democratic society, you've got to pretend you're doing the right thing. So you rile people up about in Russia about fighting the Ukrainians, or about in our country about closing the borders from Guatemalans or whatever. None of that is useful stuff. But it gets you reelected, or it gets you elected, and so your kids get to inherit your wealth for a little while, and just like Trump did, of course, and you can keep it rolling. And if you're clever enough, you can hide it in Switzerland. We can't hide in Switzerland anymore because they're cooperating, because they're goddamn wealthy anyway. They'll be sick again tomorrow. Hey, it's maddening. And when we did this in history class, kids would, as I said last time, they said, we get it. I mean, there's 5 people out there. They were predictable for nice kids. And they trickle down. Kids said, we get it. What do we do about it? I said, I don't know. Pay attention. We think it's getting better. Look, Obama's going to get elected. Oh God. He didn't know. He didn't know. Those suckers should have not necessarily gone to jail. You know the story. Everyone know the story. It's they were called by Geithner, the Goldman Sachs, all the whole crowd, down to, and they looked at each other. They've shared, and they've spilled enough information that this is fairly commonly known. They say we are in deep doo-doo. We're going to lose our jobs. We're going to lose our bank. We're probably not going to go to jail because we haven't done anything that's really it was all legal what we did, because the crooks in the Reagan administration make it legal. But our careers are over. And the Geithner said, look, we've changed. We need you to cooperate with us. We're going to help you out. We got a banking system that's in trouble. When you go back and just don't do it again. And they all walked out and looked at each other and hugged each other and high-fived and said, holy shit, we got away with it. And because they did. And let's do it again.
So when is that point that it's too late? Because when it gets to the point of being too late, then everything goes to hell in a handbasket.
Well, Michael's asking, when is the point that's getting to, what is the point, for example, when enough of the world that's got our bonds and or using our dollars say, I'm not banking dollars anymore. I'm going to go to euros. Or the problem is there's no other choice. A moment does come. It came for the British. We're not the current. We are no longer able to be the world's currency, so we're going off the gold standard, and that happened in the 1930s. It came with the Spanish, and when they had this enormous empire but blew it. They said, we can't pay back our debts. We're just going to default. If you read I think everyone here had probably read those articles. People say the debts are so stunning. Our kids, we're on track for paying 7% of our national budget to foreigners who we owe money to, because we've borrowed money against our goodwill. And if we don't pay that money back, of course, no one buys our bonds. So we have to pay it back. So the only real choice is start paying down some of that debt. And the other real way to pay down some of that debt is to save money, not consume it. You actually get a benefit out of it. I mean, a small anecdote that is of some interest, maybe. The Germans beat the crap out of the French in the Franco-Prussian War. Bismarck used that as his, in 1870 as his last gambit to unite Germany. It worked. The French were humiliated. I mean, all hell broke loose in the Commune in France. It's one of the most interesting periods in all of world history. And the Germans said, not only have you lost, you owe us reparations. You owe us tons of money because you lost and you've been screwing us for centuries, which was frankly true. And so the French, and the magic of that was the French were rich as hell. And now that they were due the reparations, the money came out of the bankers, the wealthy landowners, the wealthy bankers that own and they came up with the reparations money rather quickly. They also built that glorious church on the top of Sacré-Cœur in 1870. And so they came up with the money and they handed it to the Germans. And the effect of that for the next 10 years was the German economy went to hell in a handbasket because it had this massive inflation for money that they got that they never earned. And the French economy boomed because now people had to work their asses off to earn the money back that they just lost. And a second example, the German, the Economist Country of the Year last year was Greece, because back in 2008, after the banking crisis, the euro said, "Look, Greece, we have been guilty, and you have been even worse guilty of spending beyond your means, and we let you get away with it, but it's over. You're going to have to tighten your belt, and you're going to have to spend less and save more, and get your finances back in order." And last year, the economists voted Greece the country of the year because they pulled it off so well. They've spent less, they've saved money, their economy is more efficient now, they're doing the right thing. You can do it. You have to have a leader out there that can sell it. Well, Biden can't sell it. FDR could sell it. Obama could have sold it. Trump, Christ. So oh God, Macron probably can't either because he's now considered this elitist asshole. And so, and Germany is going to have and the Labour government,
The rich that sold it during World War I and during the Gilded Age, wasn't it the rich that sold that so that things would be a little bit better?
The rich didn't sell anything.
Yeah, but what about the Roosevelts,
Well, the Roosevelts, yeah. I mean,
they tore down the Gilded.
They tore down the Gilded Age. Yeah, and why is that? Well, because their ancestry is Dutch, and there's something about the Dutch. I don't know. And so, and we'll see how they do in soccer tomorrow. Maybe they'll beat the British, and it'll be the British versus Spain or France. So.
Ramsay, I think it's time for you to come home and watch.
I know. What do you mean?
I think your mood will be much improved.
I got an audience of 3 out there laughing, so it's. Okay. I'll come home. Is it time to pick up the grandkids? It is. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Ramsay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's fun. See you later.
Thank you, Ramsay. That was great. Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic.
Take care.
Push him out the door, Janet.
Yeah. I'll be home soon, sweetheart.
I'm going to stop recording.
Yes, please.
We're still recording.